Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. So, we talked in the last video a bit about what it means to call God Father, Mother, Creator. Now, I want to talk just a little about what it means to pray to our God who is in heaven. I'm not going to go too deep into this because it connects with one of the other videos where we can go a little further, but for this moment, let's just leave it here. Understand that when Jesus teaches us to pray to our God who is in heaven, that the idea is not distance, not our God who is far off. The idea is not distance, but immanence, presence. Cosmology for Jewish people in Jesus' time, the idea is not heaven as this lofty place, certainly not of a God who is aloof and sitting there, but heavens as the very air we breathe, the sky all around us. All of this is connected to the realm of the divine. So the God who is in heaven, and we're going to talk a little bit more when we talk about thy kingdom come, thy will be done, about this role of God, this reign of God, and what it looks like to yield, to surrender to the reality of God. But please know that the whole point is not any sort of distance, but it's immanence. This God is actually very present to where we are. Again, more on that coming very soon. Where I want to spend most of our focus for this video is hallowed be your name. So the Christian tradition is one in which, and certainly the Jewish tradition from which we draw, is one in which names are incredibly important. We have lots of genealogies. We have lists of names. The stuff people often say is the boring part of reading the Bible. It's actually pretty exciting once you get into it. But there are a lot of names, and there's a lot of stories about how people are named. So whether we think about Adam and Eve in Genesis being charged to give names to all of God's creatures, God's creation, or we think about these profound stories that we get in the Hebrew scripture, where you think about Jacob, who wrestles all night with an angel in some mysterious way, actually seems to be God, and it is from wrestling with God that Jacob becomes Israel, that he gets a new name, that he gets a new identity. We have all kinds of stories in Hebrew scripture about people who change names. Sometimes people change their names out of trauma, sometimes out of powerful experiences in the New Testament. Saul becomes Paul, but there are all kinds of traumatic experiences, stories that are full of conflict, that invite people to be able to change their names. And there are ways that people, and there are things that we go through in our lives where sometimes maybe the name that we've been given, maybe we get more connected to that story and can approach that from a place of gratitude. There's sometimes when the names that we've been given don't work for us anymore. My dear friend Brian Langdock at Gobin United Methodist Church, which I love. Brian, a few days ago, was at a Pride festival, and he told what might be one of the most heartbreaking stories I've heard about how someone was talking to him, a young adult, whose given name was Grace. And as he's there along with some other clergy that had a table at the Pride event, and he talked about all the people that came and wanted to talk about God and their experiences of God, religion, stories of beauty, but a whole lot of stories of pain and loss. This person whose given name was Grace said, I've actually am going through the process of changing my name, because she said that name Grace, because of all my experiences in the church, were so hurtful and so wounding and so negative. Grace to me feels like a churchy word. And she said she couldn't bear to be called by that name because the name had too much baggage. And I can't imagine a more heartbreaking thing than for someone to be part of a community of faith that's so toxic that the idea of grace becomes so distorted to where even the word grace it does not conjure beauty, affirmation, love, but of rejection and trauma. What a truly horrible thing. At the same time, it is good and right that sometimes we change our names. And because we're part of a story where names matter, right? So in this prayer, Jesus teaches to pray, hallowed be thy name. We say yes to this invitation to honor the name of God. We say yes to name the reality of love, beauty, kindness, tenderness, and truth that we see in Jesus. And as we learn how to hallow God's name, as we learn how to honor God's name, we learn other people's names. I'm not always good with names, and I tend to think that's because I have real issues with executive function. But I do try, and we all know the difference, don't we? It makes when somebody remembers our name. When somebody remembers your name and you wouldn't expect them to, that's profound. Equally profound in a different way sometimes when nobody knows your name, when nobody remembers what the name that you're called signifies, when nobody seems connected to that story, when they don't remember who you are and where you come from. But hallowed be thy name. Part of our spiritual practice, part of what it means to say yes to God, is learning how to honor the divine name that in turn teaches us to, as we reverence that name, how to reverence the names of others in our lives, how to reverence the bodies of others in our lives. So maybe sit with that for a moment or two. Hallowed be your name. Reverence to the name. Saying yes to that, we are learning to say yes to a way of reverencing other names, a way of naming. And sometimes that means being able to give language, being able to name things that we weren't able to name before. Sometimes it means we attempt to speak the unspeakable. But names matter. Your name matters. Your name most certainly matters to God. I hope that maybe you're in a place on a journey where you are learning how to articulate language of God and to honor the language, of God in ways that are good and right and appropriate. But I also hope that you know that your name is honored and that your name is beloved, because that is the ground floor of reality itself.